sobering, terrifying echo tonight from the cells of Guantanamo Bay. Our third story on the countdown, 3 detainees dead by, quote, suicide. Suicides in which the victims tie their own hands and feet and then hang themselves. From the investigation, quote, the most innocent explanation is that this is Gitmo meets Lord of the Flies. On June 9th and 10th, 2006, during that night, 3 prisoners died at Gitmo's Camp Delta. The immediate military response was to order all media off the island and to label the deaths suicides, acts of so-called asymmetrical warfare. 2 years later, the NCIS report claimed that all 3 of these detainees in separate cells took their own lives by the following means: braided a noose from sheets or clothing, made mannequins of themselves to appear as if they were still in bed and asleep, hung sheets to block the view into the cells, stuffed rags down their own throats past the point at which they would have gagged involuntarily, tied their own feet together, tied their own hands together, climbed up on a sink and put the noose around their neck. But a 58-page study of that NCIS report by Seton Hall University concludes that the military's internal investigation was an obvious cover-up. Law professor Mark Denbo, the director of the study, saying, quote, there are 2 possibilities here. Either the investigation is a cover-up of gross dereliction of duty, or it is a cover-up of something far more chilling. The most innocent explanation I can come up with, and that comports with all the facts, is that this is Gitmo meets the Lord of the Flies. And the study raises numerous questions, such as how the 3 bodies hung for at least 2 hours unnoticed in cells that were supposedly under constant supervision, why NCIS concluded that the suicides were a conspiracy but failed to present any evidence of such, why no Gitmo employees were ever disciplined despite strong indications by NCIS that it felt it had been misled. The contributing editor for Harper's, also a lawyer and adjunct professor at Columbia Law School, who brought this story to the Huffington Post, is Scott Horton, and he joins us now. Thanks for your time tonight, sir.
Good to be with you, Keith.
As you noted, one of the study authors said, quote, we have 3 bodies and no explanation. How is it possible that all 3 detainees had shoved rags so far down their own throats that medical personnel could not remove them? One of the dead detainees was scheduled for release from Guantanamo Bay in 19 days. Instead, he died in custody. The report goes an awful long way. Why doesn't it conclude that those were murders?
Well, the task that the Seton Hall authors took upon themselves was to review the work that was done by the military investigators, not to do their own investigation. And I think they demonstrate conclusively that the military investigation was profoundly flawed, that it rushed to judgments that really weren't supported by the evidence. But I think it would have been a mistake for Seton Hall to offer up its own conclusions. Instead, what it's recommending is that we need a new, serious investigation.
The idea that this might have been an asymmetrical act of warfare, as it was described, requires these people to have known each other or their intents or being able to take cues or have timed it in some way. Is there any evidence that there could have been a conspiracy for 3 guys, even if they somehow matched all the physical requirements that were evidenced in their own deaths? Could they have done the conspiracy?
Well, there's no serious evidence that's offered in the military investigation of a conspiracy. The best they've got to tell us is that the modus operandi, I mean, the circumstances in which the bodies were found were the same in each case. They deduce from that they must have conspired. But of course, there are other possible answers to that, particularly if you reject the idea of suicide. But here, the military investigation started with the idea that this was a suicide, backing up the statements that were made by the camp commander immediately after the events were announced, and excluded from consideration any other possible solution. That really was not a professional way to proceed.
You asked this of Professor Denbo. Let me ask it of you. Since that NCIS report based on which the investigation was based was heavily redacted, is it possible that the full report would answer some of these really large questions?
Well, that would be the best response the Pentagon could give us right now. That is to release the report unredacted. But I think if we go back and we look at the experience of prior investigations in Guantanamo, they've been issued initially with heavy redactions, and when those redactions have come away, we see that the text was embarrassing or didn't support the conclusions that the military or the Pentagon offered up. So, of course, it's possible that if we saw the unredacted text, it would would answer these questions, but I'd be skeptical of that.
Seton Hall has been responsible for many investigations, studies of what happened and has happened at Gitmo. The one that demonstrated the existence of further tapes of prisoner interrogations even after denials from the Bush administration. Is this going to produce an actual investigation, and if so, by whom?
Well, it really is sort of a David and Goliath story. That is, these Seton Hall law students and faculty have taken on the Pentagon 11 times now, as I count, and every single time the Pentagon has come up on the short side. I mean, they've clearly established that their reports are correct, and that's something quite extraordinary. I've got to think that the silence we're seeing from the Pentagon right now, they've not issued a response, suggests that they're looking at this report very carefully before they give us a public statement. So hopefully they'll do the right thing and they'll proceed to a new investigation.
Has there been enough pressure on the subject of Gitmo since the change in presidential administrations, or has that died on the vine because of the change in political winds?
Well, it's relaxed and it's moved to other areas. I mean, what we see now as a major political cause is the question of the KSM trial in Manhattan, for instance, rather than questions about the treatment of detainees and these historical issues about things that happened in 2006.
Scott Horton, national security lawyer, contributor to Harper's, who unveiled this story at Huffington Post. Great thanks for that, and great thanks for your time tonight, sir.
Great to be with you.